20 years old. Palestinians are known for their hospitality. However poor they are, they make these splendid feasts for you when you come as a visitor. And as you can imagine, when you have a splendid feast and a big family, there's going to be a large pile of dishes at the end of the meal. And I remember the image of the mother in the home trying to wash this huge pile of dishes with one little cup of water. And it was a real art, because you have to learn how to save the water at any occasion. And so a fellow here blurted out, the water, because the Palestinian population of the West Bank is 9 times the size of the illegal Jewish settler population. When I say illegal Jewish settler population, I want to be clear about what I'm saying. It's Jews from the green area who then pack up their bags and they build a home. Excuse me, sorry about that. Jews from the purple area, from Israel, who pack up their bags and decide to build a home on the land of Palestinians in the green area. And under international law, you don't have the right to do that, for the obvious reason that it's not your country. That's Palestinians' country, not Israel. You're not allowed to do that. And the Palestinian population is 9 times the size of the settler population, but Israel gives them altogether less water than altogether the settlers get. In fact, the settlers shouldn't be getting any water because they don't belong there. They belong in their country. Danielle said a fair settlement, let the Palestinians have the green areas. Most of you thought that doesn't sound very fair either. But now imagine how unfair it is. Imagine how unfair it is when the Palestinians see that even the green area is being gobbled up, is being confiscated. And even the water in the green area is being taken from them and being given to illegal Jewish settlers who have no right to be there in the first place. And then there's another problem, because in that green area, if you can imagine a line going straight down from the top to the bottom, Israel is building a wall. And it's taking all the land to the west of the wall. So it's building a wall which is stealing about 12% of the West Bank, which Israel wants to incorporate into its own state. So even the little that's left, which most of you thought was unfair, even the little that's left, Israel is stealing the water from and stealing the land from. As I said earlier, in 2006, January, the Palestinians have an election. And a lot of international observers went, people like Jimmy Carter. They said it was the fairest and freest election ever held in the Arab world. But they didn't elect the government that the US and Israel wanted. So Israel imposes this brutal economic blockade of Gaza, which is supported by the United States, the blockade. And then in June 2007, the US, Israel, and some Palestinians, they figure, let's try to overthrow this Hamas government and get rid of them. Well, Hamas was a little smarter than the Israelis, the Americans, and these Palestinian collaborators, and they kick out the folks who are planning the coup. Well, Israel and the United States get very angry, and now they tighten the screws on this economic blockade. The United Nations publishes a report just before the massacre begins. And they say Gaza is facing a human dignity crisis. It says because of this blockade of Israel, many Gaza residents have no electricity for up to 16 hours a day. Believe it or not, hard to believe, they only receive water once a week for a few hours. Use your imagination. Living in circumstances where you're only getting water once a week for a few hours. 50% of the population is unemployed. 50% is lacking food. 20% of essential drugs are at zero level. 20% of patients who are suffering from cancer, from heart disease, Israel refuses to give them permits for medical care abroad. Now I ask you, Mr. Cameron, since you heard the explanation, and we all know what Barack Obama said, if my daughters were endangered by a rocket attack, I'd do anything, including what Israel's done, to protect them. So here's the question I put to you, Mr. Cameron, and you don't have to give me the answer that I want to hear. You give the answer which you think is the right answer. If you look at the year 2008, up until the day the massacre begins, 15 times as many Palestinians as Israelis are being killed. 9 times as many Palestinian civilians are being killed as Israelis. 20 times as many Palestinian civilians in Gaza are killed as Israelis who are killed by those rocket attacks which so moved Barack Obama. 11,000 Palestinians are being held in prison. Not one, Corporal Shalit, but 11,000. For those of you who know your math, the ratio there is 11,000 to 1. Not too complicated. Then, in that tiny piece of land, which the Palestinians hope to become their homeland, they're being deprived of the water. They see their property being stolen. They see these settlements expanding, this wall being built. So, they then have to face this brutal blockade because the United States and Israel decided we don't like the government they chose to elect. Mary Robinson, the former UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, she goes to Gaza and she says, a civilization is being destroyed. I see it before my eyes. A civilization is being destroyed. Despite all that, Hamas maintains the ceasefire. To quote that Israeli website, is careful to maintain the ceasefire. Then Israel deliberately goes into Gaza, kills 6 Palestinian members of Hamas in order to provoke Hamas into its rocket attacks against Israel. And then Hamas still says, we'll agree to a ceasefire, but you've got to end this blockade. And Israel says, no, you have to stop firing the rockets, but we will not lift the blockade. The blockade, which according to Mary Robinson is destroying a civilization. So, the question is, I think, a fairly straightforward one. On the eve of the massacre on December 26th, which side had more right to resort to armed self-defense? The Israelis or the Palestinians? Which side had more right?
I don't even think it's a matter of right, because the Israelis have taken away everything else the Palestinians could have hoped to have access to: food, water, everything. You've left them no option but military resistance.
I don't see what option they had. Now, it would be unfair, were I not, to give you a chance, even if you agree with Cameron, to play the devil's advocate. The argument you constantly heard all the officials make, some of you saw the Jon Stewart segment on Gaza. How many of you saw it? Raise your hand. So you remember Jon Stewart, he had a funny line. He said, the Israel-Palestine issue is the political Mobius strip. It's the Mobius strip of American politics. How many of you remember that? How many of you know what a Mobius strip is? Raise your hand. A Mobius strip is when you twist a piece of paper, you twist it, and then you glue it together at the ends. And so if you draw a line on it, on the strip, it only has one side. Do you understand? You take a piece of paper, I wish I could do it here, roughly speaking. You take a piece of paper and you twist it, and then you connect it at the end. If you draw a line all around, it'll only have one side because the line will connect. Everyone understand? Raise your hand if you understand, basically. So, Jon Stewart says, the Israel-Palestine conflict is the Mobius strip of American politics. Why? He says, because if you listen to the senators, the congressmen, there's only one side. And then he illustrates the point. He has one senator come on and says, well, what would the United States do if Canadians were firing rockets at us? And then they have another congressman say, well, what would the United States do if Mexicans were firing rockets at us? And then they have a third senator saying, what would the United States do if Canadians were firing and a fourth saying, what would the United States do if Mexicans? And that's what you heard over and over again. The part you didn't hear was, what would the United States do if a foreign power imposed a brutal economic blockade on the United States? If Canada imposed a brutal blockade on the United States, denied Americans food, denied Americans water, denied Americans medicine, because they didn't like the fact that we elected an imbecile as president this fellow who goes by the name of George Bush. They didn't like that. And then you have to ask yourself, if our civilization were being destroyed by that blockade, would Americans just sit there and passively die? Or would they do everything they could to resist the blockade? That's the part of the picture that Barack Obama leaves out. He tells you all the terrible things that are happening to Israel, but he has not a word to say about what's being done to those poor, poor, poor people of Gaza, 80% of whom are refugees, half of whom are younger than anybody in this room, just kids, and what's being done to them. So why did Israel do it? Basically, in my opinion, two reasons. Oh, it's late already. Okay, let me just try to quickly summarize the two reasons why I think it happened, and then I'd like to hear from you. But I don't want you to agree with me, because that's not very interesting. Nobody wants clones. We want people to think for themselves. I want you to give me the hard arguments, and let's see if I can answer them.